Do Christians need to tithe? The question is usually based on the idea that since Christians are no longer under law, they are not required to give a tenth of their income to the church. However, the question often reveals an attitude of ownership rather than stewardship. In other words, how much of my money do I need to give to the church? The problem with that question is that our money as Christians does not belong to us. The question we need to rather ask is, how much of my life belongs to God? Clearly, the answer to that question is all of it, since Christ purchased us with His blood for God. We therefore belong to God 100%. We need to recognize that a major shift needs to take place in our attitude towards our lives and consequently to the resources at our disposal. If all we are and all we have belongs to God, then we are not owners but stewards of what God has entrusted us with. Asking whether Christians need to tithe is similar to asking, do Christians need to give 10% of their lives to God? So we need to recognize that we must move from ownership to stewardship and learn to steward God's resources in a way that honors God, that furthers His kingdom, that benefits the church, and supports God's salvation purposes. When we seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, Jesus promises that the Father will provide for us. Firstly, we need to ask ourselves, do we really trust God to provide for us when we seek first His kingdom? Secondly, we need to check whether we still have an attitude of ownership rather than stewardship. Thirdly, we need to learn how to be good stewards of what God has entrusted us with. Fourthly, we must learn to honor God with the money and the resources He entrusts us with as we use His resources to further His kingdom, benefit His people, and contribute toward the fulfillment of His salvation purposes. And finally, we need to understand the principles of saving God's resources and being prepared, investing God's resources so that they are multiplied, and also using God's resources to bless others as we meet their needs in Jesus' name. I encourage you to read 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20, 1 Peter 2:9, and Revelation 5:9 that establishes the truth that we belong to God and not to ourselves. I also encourage you to read Matthew 25, where Jesus describes the principles of being prepared, investment, and blessing that help us become good stewards of God's resources that He entrusts us with. And finally, it is really encouraging to read Proverbs 3:5-10, Matthew 6:19-34, and 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 that explain the principles of kingdom stewardship and the assurance of His provision in our lives as we do things His way. So don't ask the wrong question. Be a good steward of God's resources for His glory, for the furtherance of His kingdom, for the benefit of His people, and the fulfillment of His salvation purposes. God bless you.